The night everything went down, I had no idea my quiet lake cabin would turn into a battlefield of petty control and arrogance, but looking back now, the signs were there from the very first day I moved in. I had bought the place with a single dream in mind: peace. I wanted to wake up in the mornings with the sound of birds instead of honking cars, to drink my coffee on the porch while the fog rolled across the water, to finally feel like I had space to breathe after years of city life. I thought a lakeside cabin would be the perfect escape, and for a little while, it was. I unpacked slowly, set up my fishing rods, started clearing out the shed, and even built myself a small fire pit for late-night barbecues. But of course, peace never lasts long when someone like Karen lives nearby. From the moment she spotted my moving truck, she treated me like I had trespassed into her personal kingdom. She walked over in her sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and that smug smile that screamed authority. Without even asking my name, she shoved a packet of papers into my hands. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said in a tone that was more demand than greeting. "These are the HOA rules. Make sure you read them carefully. We take them very seriously around here." I remember flipping through the packet that evening, confused, because the first line said, "Mandatory membership for all residents within the HOA boundaries." The thing was, my cabin wasn't even inside their boundaries. My property was older, privately owned, and exempt from the HOA by a legal deed that went back decades. I had double-checked all of that with my realtor before signing. So I thought, maybe it's just a mistake, maybe she doesn't realize my place isn't under her control. I even tried to be polite about it, told her, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. My cabin isn't part of the HOA." Her face instantly soured, like I had insulted her entire existence. "Everyone around this lake is part of the HOA," she snapped back. "You'll see. The rules apply whether you like it or not." That was my first real introduction to HOA Karen, the type of person who didn't just want control, she demanded it. I decided to ignore her at first, thinking if I didn't give her energy, she'd get bored and move on to bothering someone else. But Karen wasn't wired that way. A few days later, as I was mowing the grass, she marched down my driveway with two women trailing behind her, both carrying clipboards like they were part of some official inspection team. Without even asking permission, they started circling my cabin, pointing at the porch, measuring the distance between my fire pit and the edge of the trees, jotting things down like they were building a case against me. Karen finally stopped at the bottom of my steps and cleared her throat loudly, as if she expected me to come running like a servant. "Excuse me," she said. "We're here to conduct a compliance inspection. There have been complaints." I stopped the mower, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and tried not to laugh. "Complaints? From who? I've only been here a week." She crossed her arms. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't attend the last HOA meeting. That's mandatory. And your porch light? It's far too bright. It disrupts our evening neighborhood walks. And don't get me started on that fire pit. Totally unapproved." The women behind her nodded and scribbled on their clipboards like I was facing trial. I took a deep breath and kept my tone calm. "Ma'am, once again, this cabin is not under your HOA. You don't have the authority to inspect my property. You don't have the authority to fine me. And you certainly don't have the authority to tell me what kind of light bulb to use." Her eyes narrowed, her lips pursed, and for a moment, I swear I thought she was going to explode. Instead, she smiled coldly. "We'll see about that," she muttered, and marched back down the driveway with her little entourage. I knew right then that ignoring her wasn't going to be enough. Karen wasn't the type to accept boundaries, not even legal ones. She was the type to test, push, and eventually force her way into whatever she wanted. Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated. She left notes taped to my gate about violations and penalties. She slipped newsletters under my door, highlighting community rules in yellow marker as if I hadn't read them the first 10 times. She even had the nerve to leave a voicemail on my phone, saying, "You'll find things are much easier around here if you just play by the rules. Don't make me involve the board." At first, I tried to keep my cool. I'd worked hard to get this place, and I wasn't about to let some nosy neighbor ruin it for me. But every time I saw her walking her little lapdog past my driveway, glaring at me like I was an invader, I knew she was plotting her next move. And sure enough, the next move came one Saturday evening. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink over the lake, when I spotted her again, this time with 3 men and 2 women behind her. They were carrying more clipboards, and one of them even had a tape measure hanging from their belt. They looked like a squad preparing to raid a crime scene. Karen didn't bother with pleasantries. She marched right up to the edge of my porch and announced, "We are here for a full property evaluation. Failure to cooperate will result in immediate fines and potential legal action." I almost spit out my coffee laughing. Legal action? Karen, I don't think you get it. I'm not in your HOA. You have no power here. Her face went beet red. Everyone is in my HOA. Everyone. Don't test me. Her little group muttered in agreement, like backup singers to her solo performance. It was in that moment I realized this wasn't just about rules, it was about control. Karen couldn't stand the idea that someone nearby wasn't under her thumb. And I knew then, she wouldn't stop until she tried something bigger, something worse. It was a Saturday evening, one of those calm, golden evenings where the lake turns into a sheet of glass and every sound seems amplified, the birds calling to each other in the trees, the splash of a fish breaking the surface, even the hum of my grill warming up on the porch. I had worked all week and planned a simple night to myself, grill a couple of steaks, play some music low enough to blend with the crickets, and maybe sit by the fire until the stars came out. I thought finally I'd get the peace I had been craving since moving in. But peace, as I had learned in my short time at the lake, was something Karen couldn't allow. She thrived on disruption, on being in control, and apparently, she had been saving her boldest move yet for that night. Around 7 o'clock, I heard the sound of multiple car doors slamming shut. At first, I figured maybe someone nearby was having guests over. After all, summer weekends at the lake often meant family barbecues or small gatherings. But the sound didn't fade, it grew louder, mixed with voices and laughter. When I stepped off the porch and looked toward my gate, I froze. There was Karen, standing tall like a general leading an army, dressed in her best, hostess outfit, holding a tray of drinks like she was about to throw a celebration. Behind her, no less than 10 people trailed along, carrying picnic baskets, coolers, folding chairs, and even a portable speaker system. My gate, the same gate she had already complained about 3 times for being too rustic and not uniform with community standards, now had her guests pushing against it like it was the entrance to their private party venue. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She had actually shown up to my private property with an entire group of people, uninvited, acting as though she owned the place. When she spotted me, she lit up with a fake smile, waved her hand in the air, and called out, "Oh, there you are. We're just going to use your yard tonight for a little gathering. Don't worry, you won't even notice us. It'll be fun." My jaw tightened. I walked down to the end of the porch, arms crossed, and kept my voice as steady as I could. "Karen, what are you talking about? This is my cabin, my yard. You can't just show up here with guests and throw a party. This isn't community space. This is private property." Her face shifted into that familiar look of superiority, the one she wore every time she thought she had the upper hand. "Don't be so difficult," she said dismissively. "The community needs spaces like this. We don't have enough picnic areas by the lake, and your cabin has such a lovely open yard. Honestly, you should be proud we chose your place. It's an honor." I couldn't believe the arrogance. I took a step closer to the gate and pointed firmly. "This is not a public park. You didn't ask permission. You didn't get invited. You can't just use my property whenever you feel like it. She rolled her eyes and turned back to her group. He's just being stubborn. He'll come around. Set the chairs up over there near the fire pit. The kids can use the dock. One of her guests actually began lifting the latch on my gate like they were about to waltz right in. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just Karen being annoying, this was a full-blown invasion. If I let this slide, it would never stop. Next time it wouldn't be 10 people, it would be 20. And then she'd start acting like she had permanent rights to my yard. I wasn't going to let that happen. I forced a tight smile and said, "Give me just a minute. I'll be right back." I turned and walked back into my cabin, but inside my head, my thoughts were racing. I could call the sheriff immediately, sure, but I wanted to send Karen a clear message first, that my property wasn't hers, that her arrogance wouldn't win here. That's when I remembered the upgrades I'd installed the week I moved in. My cabin had a tall, iron gate at the entrance, one that locked securely from the inside. And not long ago, I had set up a smart lighting system connected to my phone. I had put it in mainly for convenience, but now, standing in my kitchen watching Karen's guests start unloading coolers, I realized I could use it to my advantage. I stepped back outside quietly, walked down the path to the gate while they were distracted, and in one smooth motion, pulled the gate shut and snapped the heavy lock into place. The metallic clank echoed through the evening air, instantly catching Karen's attention. Her head snapped toward me, and her smile evaporated. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked, her voice rising over the chatter of her guests. I leaned against the fence calmly and smirked. "Making sure my property stays mine." That's when the shouting began. Karen's guests started protesting, some angry, some confused. "Come on, man, we drove all the way out here," one said. Another added, "It's just one night, don't be so uptight." Karen banged her palm on the gate like she was demanding service at a restaurant. "You can't lock us out. This is community property. You don't own this alone, we all have a right to enjoy it." I shook my head slowly. "That's where you're wrong, Karen. You don't have any right to this. This is my land. My cabin. And since you don't seem to understand that, let me remind you another way." With that, I pulled out my phone, opened the app, and with one single tap, I shut off every outdoor light on the property. Instantly, the entire yard went black. The warm glow that had been spilling from my porch vanished, the lights around the fire pit and dock disappeared, and all that was left was the deep blue of the lake and the dim outline of the trees. The sudden darkness made Karen and her guests panic. I heard gasps, nervous laughter, and the shuffling of feet as people fumbled for their phones to use as flashlights. Karen's voice pierced through the chaos, shrill and desperate. "Turn the lights back on. This is harassment. You're going to regret this." But I just leaned casually against the fence, watching their little gathering crumble. "No, Karen," I said calmly, my voice steady in the dark. "This is called private property. And you're trespassing." Some of her guests started arguing with her, whispering that maybe they should just go back, that this wasn't worth it. A few began walking toward their cars, clearly embarrassed. Others muttered angrily, glaring at her for dragging them into this mess. Karen, though, wasn't ready to admit defeat. She stomped her foot like a child and screamed that she was going to call the sheriff, that she would have me fined, sued, and dragged out of the cabin if she had to. I didn't flinch. I knew the law was on my side. But more importantly, I knew that at that moment, I had already won. I stood there in the dark, leaning against my gate, watching the chaos unravel like a slow-motion movie. Karen's guests were stumbling around, their picnic baskets and coolers suddenly not looking so festive anymore. A few pulled out their phone flashlights, waving them nervously across the ground as if the woods around us might come alive. The sound of crickets and frogs filled the silence that followed, broken only by Karen's shrill voice demanding the lights come back on. She was banging on the gate now, rattling the metal so hard it echoed across the yard. "Open this gate right now. You can't just shut people out like this. We are your neighbors, and we have rights." I stayed calm, my arms folded, a smirk on my face that I knew would only make her angrier. "The only people with rights on this property are me, myself, and I said smoothly. "The rest of you are trespassing. If you don't like the dark, I suggest you head back to your cars." Her guests shifted uncomfortably, their bravado fading fast. A couple of them muttered things like, "Maybe we should just go," or, "Karen, this doesn't feel right." But Karen wasn't letting go of her fantasy. She turned on me with fire in her eyes. "You think you're so clever, locking us out and turning off the lights. But you're not going to intimidate me. I run this community. I decide what happens here, not you." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and I could hear the desperation bleeding through. That was the thing about Karen, her power only existed if people believed in it. And right now, with her guests growing restless and the darkness pressing in around them, that belief was crumbling fast. I tilted my head toward the cars parked along the gravel road. "Then go ahead, Karen. Run the community. Host your party somewhere else. Because this yard, this dock, this cabin, it's mine. And the only thing you're running tonight is a bunch of tired guests back to their vehicles." Her face twisted with rage, but I could tell she was losing ground. One woman in her group actually spoke up, her voice uncertain. "Karen, maybe we should just leave. This doesn't seem legal." He did say it was his private property. Karen whipped around and snapped, "Don't you dare undermine me. This is a community event, and he's just trying to bully us." But her authority was cracking. The group was breaking apart, half of them edging toward the cars while the other half stood awkwardly, unsure whether to follow her or listen to their instincts. Karen turned back to me, her chest heaving, and pulled out her phone like it was a weapon. "Fine. If you won't cooperate, I'll call the sheriff. You're about to learn what happens when you defy the HOA president." She started dialing, her long nails tapping furiously at the screen. I didn't move. I didn't panic. I just leaned against the fence, perfectly calm. "Go ahead," I said. "Please call them. I'd love to hear you explain why you're trying to throw a party on someone else's private property." She faltered for just a second, her eyes flickering with doubt, but then she pressed the call button anyway and held the phone to her ear. Her voice rose with exaggerated urgency as she said, "Yes, I need an officer at the lake cabins immediately. There's a man here who's refusing to let us use community space. He's being aggressive, locking us out, and harassing us." The way she twisted the story made me laugh out loud. I couldn't help it. Her guests shot me nervous glances, clearly realizing the truth wasn't quite lining up with her dramatics. I called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't forget to mention that you broke onto private property with 10 uninvited guests, Karen. The sheriff's going to love that part." She glared at me, whispering furiously into the phone, then hung up and shoved it back into her pocket. "You're in big trouble now," she hissed. "When the sheriff gets here, you'll regret embarrassing me." I didn't bother arguing. I knew the law was on my side, and I knew that every second she kept her guests standing in the dark was another second they realized how insane this whole stunt was. I decided to make it even more uncomfortable for them. I strolled casually back to my porch, sat in my chair, and poured myself a glass of iced tea. From where I sat, I could still see them clustered by the gate, their voices hushed now, their nerves fraying. Karen kept pacing like a caged animal, muttering under her breath and waving her arms in frustrated gestures. One of the men finally spoke up, his tone sharp. "Karen, this is ridiculous. You told us this was some kind of community space. It's clearly not. I didn't come here to get into legal trouble." Another chimed in, "Yeah, I've got kids in the car. I'm not waiting around for the cops to show up over something like this." That was the breaking point. Two cars started pulling away slowly, headlights flashing across the trees as they left Karen standing there with only a few stubborn loyalists. Her face twisted into pure fury as she shouted after them, "Fine. Go. But you'll regret siding with him instead of me." The remaining guests looked more uncomfortable than ever, glancing at each other with the kind of doubt that spreads like wildfire. I sipped my tea and watched the drama unfold, amused. This wasn't just about a party anymore, this was about Karen's image. She needed to win, to prove she had control. But in trying to prove it, she had just exposed herself as powerless. She had no authority over me, and now even her own friends were realizing it. The darkness around them pressed closer, the sound of the woods swallowing their uneasy whispers. Karen was still clinging to her fantasy, still rattling the gate and muttering about lawsuits and fines. But for me, the night was already decided. Whether or not the sheriff showed up, whether or not Karen kept screaming, I had made my point loud and clear. This cabin wasn't hers, and it never would be. Sure enough, after about 15 minutes of tense waiting, I saw headlights bouncing down the gravel road, cutting through the trees and lighting up the edges of the lake. Karen straightened up instantly, her posture shifting from frustrated neighbor to smug queen, as if the cavalry had finally arrived to restore her throne. She turned to her dwindling group of guests and announced triumphantly, "Finally. Now he's going to get what he deserves. You'll all see." I stayed calm on my porch, sipping my drink, watching the patrol car roll up slowly before parking right at the edge of the road. A single deputy stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of expression that told me he'd seen more nonsense than he ever cared to deal with. He walked up with steady steps, shining his flashlight briefly across the yard before addressing me directly. "Evening, sir. Is this your property?" His voice was calm, professional, not at all the tone you'd use if you thought you were approaching a criminal. I stood, set my glass down, and nodded. "Yes, officer. I own this cabin outright. The deed is in my name, and this land is privately owned. These people showed up uninvited, tried to force their way in, and refused to leave." Karen jumped in before I could say anything else, practically running to the deputy with her arms waving. "Don't listen to him. He's lying. This is community property, and as HOA president, I have the authority to designate it for gatherings. He locked us out, turned off the lights, and tried to humiliate us. He's harassing me." Her words tumbled out so fast she was nearly out of breath. The deputy held up a hand to stop her, then turned to me again. "Sir, just so I'm clear, you're saying this cabin is not part of the HOA jurisdiction?" "That's right," I said firmly. "It's written into the deed. My realtor confirmed it when I bought the place. This property has never been and will never be part of the HOA. I don't pay their dues, I don't follow their rules, and I don't answer to their president." The deputy nodded once, then turned his flashlight directly on Karen. "Ma'am, is that true? Is this property outside your HOA?" For a moment, Karen's face faltered, but she quickly regained her smugness. "Well, technically, yes. But it's still part of the community. He should follow the rules out of respect." The deputy let out a quiet sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose like he had dealt with this kind of nonsense before. "Ma'am, let me be perfectly clear. You have no authority on this property. None. You cannot hold gatherings here, you cannot issue fines, and you cannot harass the owner for not following HOA rules. If this cabin is outside your jurisdiction, then it's no different than any other private property. You and your guests are trespassing." The word trespassing hit the air like a hammer. Karen's guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering nervously, others already edging toward their cars. The deputy noticed and raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "You all need to leave. Right now. Pack up your things and go, before I start writing citations." A ripple of grumbling spread through the group, but none of it was directed at me anymore. It was directed at Karen. One man muttered, "I told you this was a bad idea," while another shook his head in frustration. A woman sighed and said, "You said this was allowed, Karen. You lied to us." The disappointment in their voices was louder than any argument. Karen's face turned beet red, her jaw tightening as she tried to salvage what little authority she thought she had. "Don't let him fool you. This is still part of the lake community. He's just twisting words. We have rights here." But no one was buying it anymore. Her guests started gathering their things, folding up chairs, loading coolers back into cars. They weren't about to get a trespassing ticket just because Karen couldn't admit she was wrong. The deputy turned back to me and gave a small, knowing smile. "Looks like you handled this about as well as anyone could. If she comes back, give us a call right away. We've had complaints about her before, so this isn't exactly new." That last part nearly made me laugh out loud. Complaints about Karen? Of course. It made perfect sense. She probably spent her free time harassing half the county with her imaginary authority. Karen, realizing she was losing control, tried one last desperate move. She pointed at me and shouted, "This isn't over. You think you've won, but I'll find a way. I'll take you to court. I'll have you fined. You can't just defy me like this." Her words echoed through the trees, but they sounded hollow now, like the final outburst of someone who had already lost. The deputy shut her down immediately. "Ma'am, if you don't leave right now, I'll escort you off the property myself. And if I have to do that, you won't like the paperwork that follows." That was it. Karen's shoulders slumped, her bravado collapsing under the weight of reality. She stomped back toward her car, muttering curses under her breath, and slammed the door hard enough to make the whole vehicle shake. One by one, the rest of the cars pulled away, their headlights disappearing into the trees until the night was quiet again. For the first time in hours, the only sounds left were the crickets, the soft lapping of the lake, and the gentle crackle of my fire pit. The deputy gave me a nod. "You did the right thing. Don't let people like that push you around." I thanked him, shook his hand, and watched as his cruiser slowly rolled back down the gravel road, the red and blue lights fading until they were gone. When the silence returned fully, I walked back into my cabin, unlocked the gate again, and turned on the porch lights with a single tap on my phone. The warm glow spilled across the yard, chasing away the shadows that had frightened Karen's little group only minutes earlier. I poured myself a fresh drink, sat back in my chair, and finally cut into the steak I had been waiting to enjoy all evening. It was cold now, but I didn't care. The taste of victory made it better than any meal I'd had in years. As I ate, I thought about what had just happened. Karen had shown up at my home with a mob, tried to steal my space for her own ego, and even called the police thinking they would back her up. Instead, she walked away humiliated, her authority stripped bare in front of her own guests. The cabin felt different that night, not just a place I owned, but a place I had defended. I had stood my ground, and the law had been on my side. And the best part? Karen never tried anything like that again. She still walked her dog past my driveway, still glared at me from behind her sunglasses, but she never dared bring guests or try to hold events on my property. The message had been delivered loud and clear. My cabin was off limits, my land was mine, and if she ever forgot, I was more than ready to remind her, with a locked gate, a dark yard, and the law standing firmly behind me.